Every year seems to be another record year for Banff National Park. In the past decade, visitation has grown 31%. And while social media might show its famous views as calm and peaceful, the reality is a bit different. There's crowds and traffic, and the approach to tourism in the region has become campaign after campaign, trying to convince visitors that their trips will be better if they just leave their cars behind. An escape to the mountains? Hardly. I mean, look at this ad I spotted on the highway. It says escape the crowds. How? By hiring a helicopter.
Over the years, there's been more and more people, and we've had to build more and more infrastructure to accommodate those people.
Now is probably a good time to explain that the town of Banff only really exists because of tourism. And you can basically only live in the town if you work in the national park. While the town is incorporated and governed by an elected mayor and councillors, the federal government and Banff's superintendent have final say over many decisions that are made in the town, down to some pretty specific details, like a cap on commercial floor space, which is meant to fulfill one key part of the national park's mandate: to, quote, protect and present these places for the benefit and enjoyment of current and future generations. The other side of that mandate is to maintain or restore ecological integrity. And it's been pointed out that the word tourism won't be found in the National Parks Act, but in the town's incorporation agreement, it literally states that the town's primary function is to serve as a center for visitors. More than 4 million people visit Banff National Park every year, and 80% of those visitors end up going to the town of Banff.
We love that. It supports our social structure in the town. It supports our community, but we also have significant social and town planning issues to deal with as a result of it. So it's kind of a catch-22. But I think that's kind of a new piece of the puzzle that I see evolving over the last 10 or 15 years.
Yeah.
Is people who live here saying too many visitors in terms of our lifestyle and a privilege to live in a national park. Suck it up, but also, yeah, but we're human.
This is a conversation that's loaded with tension. After all, the parks are supposed to be for everyone, not just the people who live in or near them. Peter says he's not one to complain on the basis of tourism alone. He's more worried about what comes with the tourism. Park and rides, development on lands that wildlife use, wetlands dried up after damming, and fire management that's necessary to protect the expensive infrastructure that humans need.
If you really want to protect the ecosystem, then you don't take any more from it. We've taken a lot from it already. And so my personal feeling is that the Bow Valley has given up a lot for the tourism industry.
Now, Banff isn't alone in this whole tourism thing. Globally, there's a conversation that's bubbling up about overtourism, the idea that too many people are visiting attractions, especially after the pandemic. Take this screen set up in a Japanese town near Mount Fuji to obscure the views and discourage people from making a photo pit stop. Or the federal parks in the US trialing different sorts of timed entry systems to control the crowds. And in Venice and Barcelona, tourism pressures have resulted in protests there, with calls for foreigners to go home and even some getting sprayed with water guns. I asked Parks Canada about how sustainable tourism is in Banff right now.
While the majority of the park, over 96% of Banff National Park continues to be pristine wildlife, wildland area, these sectors of the park that are easily accessible provide those kind of iconic views that people are seeing on social media, etc., and it's really drawing them to it.
Have we reached a point past sustainability?
I don't think so, no. Like I would say, there are for sure long weekends in the summer, especially when it's a nice sunny day. It gets very busy, especially, in and around the town site and those easily accessible areas. But as a park user myself, I can say that oftentimes if I walk 5 minutes down a path, even in an easily accessible area, I often find myself alone or just with a few visitors.
One famous spot in the park is overflowing with visitors.
Lake Louise hosts between 10 to 12,000 visitors on an average summer day. The Upper Lake parking lot is typically full between 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. And, in previous years, there's an estimated like 50% of the vehicles are turned away.
To manage that volume, Parks Canada has tried measures like higher parking fees, shuttles that basically run every 15 minutes from dawn until dusk, and closing down personal vehicle access to Moraine Lake Road. They also are in the middle of creating visitor management plans because these tweaks just aren't enough to manage all those people hoping to get these perfect views. And it's not just traffic. Officials have seen more litter, more people going off trail through sensitive environments, and visitors feeding wildlife. Every week, helicopters fly barrels and barrels of human waste from the 2 tea houses in the Upper Lake Louise area. And those attractions are more remote than the lakeshore and require a hike to get there. Other plans to manage visitation to certain attractions are in the works too. The national park said they're asking visitors for feedback about how to manage the congestion around Lake Minnewanka. That's a place that sees about 1 million people every year.
It's right off the highway, it's easy to get to, but it's also not only an important area for human visitation, but it's also really important ecologically speaking for the wildlife that make their home in Banff National Park. So that's why we're really at this point where we need to make sure that whatever this plan looks like in its final form, it balances Parks Canada's dual mandate. We have to balance ecological needs with visitations.
Managing these crowds only works to a certain level, and there's the sense that these measures will eventually reach their limits.
When you ask me, is it sustainable? Boy, that's a tough question, and we need to have a very, very rigorous set of criteria in order to assess sustainability in its bigger picture. But locally, in terms of the ecosystem, what I see are more conflicts with the ecosystem by bringing more people in here and trying to figure out how we're going to design the ecostructure with the land base that we've committed to tourism.
Peter gives me an analogy. It's like a phone booth. Because Parks Canada won't allow those developments like the town or roads or ski hills in the national park to sprawl and grow, these tourists are all piled into these destinations.
I think we're the glass in the phone booth is bulging, and we need to look and see where it needs to be reinforced.
Now, some conservationists will say that Banff has already reached the tipping point and that there are already too many visitors. Peter thinks there hasn't been enough research to even say that, at least not involving residents and Canadians as a whole.
We need some kind of a mechanism to have the scientific baseline and then sit around the table and make some of those hard decisions on how we're going to deal with it. You know, if it was a theater or a church or a football stadium, you take McMahon Stadium and sits how many, let's say 20,000 people, and 40,000 people want to come. Well, you don't allow them in. It just doesn't work for a whole variety of reasons, and I think we have to look at this landscape the same way. And it's not that we don't want to allow them in, it's that how do we allow this part to be a functioning ecosystem and still allow the people who want to enjoy it and benefit from that experience to get here. And I don't think the answer's out there.